Okay, I think we've got the recording going, and let's see, we need to get the screen sharing going, and did that do it? Yes. And we'll switch and off we go, I think. Okay, welcome to fifth or sixth class of God is Good. I'm not sure where we are exactly, except topic-wise, we're about to take up the book of Exodus with Moses and the Pharaohs and going out into the wilderness and Mount Sinai and all that good stuff. And the end of the course will be the Ten Commandments, the sort of big deal thing in all this that we've been studying at this point. So tonight, Exodus and Moses, part 1. We're really, it says we're covering chapters 1 through 10, but the truth of the matter is we're going to end it at the end of 4, and you all can read for yourself 5 through 10. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So there's the sources like normal. Oops, I should have changed that to Exodus instead of Genesis. Oh well. And all those sources that Prager uses are listed in his book. They're quite numerous. And then we use the Sefaria.org Bible translations for the slides because it comes very close, actually, to what Prager uses in his books. Okay, so here we go. Exodus, chapter 1. This is verse 7. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly so that the land was filled with them. And this is going to be this whole thing leading up to the slavery and let my people go, and ultimately to the Ten Commandments. This is the third attempt by God to teach humans how to be good. His first attempt, if you don't remember, was the creation of man with a conscience. And that didn't work out so well. Cain and Abel, right off the bat, Cain didn't listen to his conscience very well. And the second attempt was Noah and the flood, and Noahide laws, and that didn't work. So you might be asking yourselves, well, why not just start with the Ten Commandments? Why go through all this other stuff? Well, there's a couple of rational reasons why that might be true. God may well not have known where free will would lead. It was, you might say, an experiment. You also might say that the first two were necessary steps incrementally to get here. And certainly, whether intended or not, this establishes the reason for being for the Jews. It's interesting. This slide would suggest, that there are Israelites everywhere, Jews everywhere, and in fact, when you ask people how many Jews they think there are in a city or a state or a nation, generally speaking, they way overestimate how many are actually there. On the average, only 2 out of every 1,000 people is Jewish. Very small percentage of the population. The overestimation, though, could well come from the fact that they have greater influence than their size might suggest. And in the next verse, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. That phrase, did not know, is an interesting one. Basically what it's telling us is that they have forgotten about Joseph and how he saved Egypt from the famines. Remember that? But this king arose over Egypt who did not know that, did not remember that. It's a form basically of ingratitude, which is, Prager likes to point out, one of the most common bad traits and one of the worst bad traits in humans is ingratitude, either not acknowledging something was done for you or soon forgetting. But oh boy, how well remember when somebody does something nasty to us. We remember that. So to be a good person, which of course this is all about, both the Torah and this course, what lessons can we learn from the Torah about being good? To be a good person requires fighting your nature, which tends to be ungrateful. You need to fight that. That's why the Exodus story, or one of the reasons, the Exodus story starts with forgetting. Egypt does not remember who saved Egypt over 400 years ago. And it's important to remember both the good and the bad. Remembering both good and evil are indispensable to being good. You need both of those perspectives over history to teach wisdom. Same with nations, same civilizations. They need to remember. In fact, it's a pretty convincing argument that a nation that doesn't remember its history doesn't exist. It's like as if you woke up in the morning and for some reason your memory was completely wiped. Would you still be you? Probably not in any normal sense of that word. Likewise with nations. If you erase your history, you aren't who you were. And being grateful is probably why the Jews have uniquely survived so long, is that they remember well. They have rituals and study and such, at least the practicing ones, that help them remember all this stuff, and it's been going on for almost 4,000 years. So, verse 9, and he said to his people, look, the Israelite people, he is Pharaoh, by the way. Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. What's interesting here is that Pharaoh is sucking all the Egyptians basically into his evil, you might say. Great evil really requires masses of people to participate. Individuals can inflict a lot of evil, but not nearly on such a massive scale that Pharaoh did, or Hitler did, or Lenin did, or Pol Pot did. And we sort of instinctively understand that, because when we see one person do such evil, like a lone gunman, like a Lee Harvey Oswald, or a mass shooter at the school, when we see one person do that, we almost automatically start coming up with conspiracy stories to sort of tell ourselves, man, it must have taken a lot of people to do that much evil. He couldn't possibly have done that much evil by himself. But in a lot of those cases, they really did do it by themselves. But it does point out that we do it in some way. Understand that to do great, massive amounts of evil requires the masses, the people, some followers to help, quote unquote. Another thing here too, there are two Hebrew words for the sense of a nation. One is Am, and the other is Goy. Am is a nation that is built by blood ties, and Goy is a political unit. And what Pharaoh is talking about here, the Hebrew word Am is used. Pharaoh is basically worried that the Jews will dilute the bloodline of the Egyptians. And that kind of thinking, as in the picture here with some Nazi followers, just a few, has gotten a lot of evil accomplished too. Jewish thought, on the other hand, is based on goy as a nation, meaning a political unit. It's not based on bloodline or ethnicities or race or anything like that. Anybody is welcome to join the Jewish nation. Blood and ethnicity and that sort of thing are not important. And the one example I'd throw out at this point, and probably because Prager did too, Ruth, as in the book of Ruth, a non-Jew Moabite, becomes an ancestor to King David and ultimately to Jesus. Verse 13, the Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites. Most Egyptians were not as evil as Pharaoh, just like most Germans weren't as evil as Hitler. There are very few extremely evil individuals. So that raises an interesting question. What does it take for evil to triumph, evil to win, evil to do vast, massive quantities of evil? Well, Prager's thoughts are these. It takes three things. Ordinary people being indoctrinated somehow, allowing themselves to be convinced that whatever is behind the evil is correct or right or overdue, or however it's put. They basically become indoctrinated. Two, people who benefit by the evil. And there are people who benefit by the evil who aren't necessarily directly part of it. Sticking with the Holocaust examples, there are a fair number of Europeans who got very wealthy from Jewish assets during the Hitler regime. So we got ordinary people who are indoctrinated to help create massive evil. Two, people who benefit by that evil. And three, and this is the one Prager generally spends the most time talking about, lack of courageous, good people. There's a fair number of good people. We all know good people. It's fairly safe to assume that there's a fair number of good people in the world. The problem is the courageous part. Courage is a very rare trait in the battle against evil. And unfortunately, good without courage generally fails in the battle because it's a battle. Evil doesn't play fair, quote unquote. And it often comes down to literally a battle where it's kind of a fight for your life or a fight for your country, that sort of thing. Okay, moving on. Verse 15, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah. What is translated here as Hebrew midwives in the Hebrew language could just as easily be translated midwives of the Hebrews. And in fact, that's what Prager suggests makes the most sense. It's the most rational. Why would Pharaoh suspect that Hebrew midwives who were Hebrew, would kill the sons of the Hebrews? I mean, that really makes no sense at all, to expect that sort of thing. And we'll see later on that there are other clues to this, other than just it doesn't make sense that Hebrew women could be convinced to do that. Another thing that's interesting here is that the Torah identifies two of these midwives by name who actually do a great thing, which again we'll see here in a minute. The Torah is not at all bashful about pointing out when non-Jewish people are heroes. And these two midwives to the Hebrews were heroes, as we'll learn here in a minute. But the interesting thing is, these two midwives were named in the Torah. We don't know the name of the Pharaoh. It's never mentioned. Naming is a big thing, particularly in the Torah, and generally when you stop and think about it. When you name something, it takes on some kind of higher meaning or transcendent sense. It's like you name your dog, and it becomes a big deal if it's lost or dies. Take it from Prager. Don't ever name your fish if you have a fish tank at home. Don't name they made that mistake early on. He and his wife did, and they have since learned not to bother naming the fish, because it's very different if a guppy dies than when Tim dies. Okay. 17. The midwives, the Egyptian midwives to the Hebrews, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. You note that it wasn't out of compassion, and it wasn't out of love of God. It was out of fear of God. And what this is pointing to is the importance of fearing God, a much more meaningful thing than loving God, actually. This incorporates an unassailable moral code that God has provided, not in its final form yet, but He has provided some ethical monotheism here, that a higher authority that these women believe for sure, fearing God, not only has the moral code been provided, but the higher authority who provided it will in fact judge everyone at some time or another. And you need that kind of backbone, you might say, or fortitude in order to be so brave. I mean, these women, Egyptian women, are talking to Pharaoh about this. It's another reason why, for instance, down through history, most fine people are usually referred to as God-fearing people, not so much God-loving people. It gives strength. It's more fortitude to what you're trying to do. Here's another example of the Torah often citing heroes who are non-Jews and citing evil people as Jewish. And in this case, they're also females. And this is something, I mention it probably way too often. You've probably gotten the point by now. But it's absolutely ridiculous that people refer to the Torah as sexist. It just isn't. If you actually look at it and read it, it just isn't sexist. It isn't nationality based. I mean, all nationalities have good and evil in them. That's very clear. What isn't terribly surprising, and the Torah does in fact stick to the kind of a patriarchal setup, but that was the setup of the day back in around the Bronze Age, or coming into it, going out of it, I forget exactly, but 4,000 years ago, 3,600 years ago, societies were patriarchal. It's interesting that we have no record of Pharaoh punishing these midwives. He merely pleads with them, "Go do as I say," and it's well to know that sometimes being good against evil doesn't necessarily lead to the worst case. Well, I mean, it would have been very easy to see Pharaoh just condemn them to death, off with their heads, and let's try another 2 midwives kind of approach. But he doesn't do that. In the case of the Holocaust, if we're going to keep that analogy going, even the Nazi soldiers who could not slaughter Jews directly, Hitler didn't off with their heads or anything like that. They were simply reassigned, albeit often to the front, would certainly put their lives in danger. But it wasn't the kiss of death to say, I can't do that. Can you find me another job? So what's the lesson there? Sometimes being good against evil doesn't lead to the worst case. And then in 19, the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, they are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. Oops, here's a lie. The midwives are lying to Pharaoh. And of course the lie is that it's not that these women had their children come too fast. That's what was meant by they are vigorous. That they're born quicker than the midwives can get there. Almost suggesting to Pharaoh that these midwives understand that the Hebrew women are like animals. They don't need midwives. They give birth very quickly. It's all over and done with, and so on. But obviously that's not true. It's because the midwives wouldn't kill them. And they're telling Pharaoh this little white or semi-tan or whatever color you want to call it lie. This is an example, and there's lots of them actually in the Torah, where lying is moral. In fact, sometimes lying is required under God's moral code. We're certainly not obligated to tell the truth to murderers, like Pharaoh is in this case murdering the baby boys. There's 3 kinds of morals here, or category morals. There's absolute morals, there's situational morals, or what usually is referred to as situational ethics, and relativism, or moral relativism. 2 of those are the right idea, the third is not. We need moral absolutes. That's what ultimately the 10 Commandments supplies. If you happen to be Jewish, that's what all the Talmudic studies and Midrash and all that stuff, the rest of the Old Testament gives you another 600 and however many laws or moral codes. So those are the absolutes. The situational ones suggest that, well, from one situation to the next, you have to look at the context of the behavior or the act to see if it was morally bad. And that sort of hopefully just makes sense intuitively. I mean, take the case of sexual intercourse. The very same act in a rape situation is evil. The very same act in a loving relationship, husband and wife, for instance, is a good thing, a beautiful thing. So you can't just you have to look at the situation to determine whether or not it's morally right. Relativism, which generally does not include a look at an absolute code, it's more like, well, my opinion is this and your opinion is that, and we'll have another opinion. Everything is relative. In one culture, it's okay to kill because that's the culture. No, it's not. I mean, it may be true, and they may think that, but it's not right. It's an evil. All right, moving on. Chapter 2, first verse in chapter 2. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. This is Moses' parents. They aren't even named here. They are later named, actually, in chapter 6. verse 20. But the point here is, what the Torah is trying to get across is that Moses was an ordinary guy. He was not born miraculously. He didn't come with any expectations, at least at the moment of birth. He was not preordained for anything. He was just a normal mortal. What will happen as this story plays out, he will prove his mettle to God, who then chooses him for the task of leading the Israelites out of Egypt. And as this story progresses, we are going to see more and more preeminent roles by women in Moses' life. As I've mentioned, it's going to get repetitive, sorry. There are many heroic women in the Torah. It pounds home, if you will, the equality of male and female. It meaning the Torah does. So, in verse 3, when she could hide him no longer, that's the mom, Moses' mom, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. This was kind of fun revelation to me. I'd never heard of this before. What's really interesting is that the word for basket here is tavah, T-E-V-A-H, which means, and was used back when we were talking about an ark. Noah had a tavah, and Moses was put in a tavah. Obviously very different in terms of size, but the same idea. God is in control. God is steering the ship. It's for God's purposes. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And here we go again. I talked about that third attempt at fixing humanity. I wanted to continue that thought here for just a second. There's a fourth and fifth and sixth that some people talk about. The first was conscious when man was created. The second was the flood, and Noah was given the 7 laws of Noah, also called the Noahide laws. We're about to hit the third one, which is the 10 Commandments. If you're a Christian, you probably would say that Jesus is the fourth attempt to make people good. If you're Islam, you could say Muhammad is the 5th attempt. And there are some who think, there are some who think that the Mormons may represent the 6th attempt. I'll go for maybe through 4 or 5. I'm not sure about the Mormon one, but it's an interesting progression of attempts at resetting things, getting humankind to be good. Verse 5, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile, while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. By the way, it's still tavah. It's not basket, it's an ark, but that wouldn't have made sense in the narrative, I guess, so that's not how it's translated. Think of this, though. I mean, this is pretty amazing. The daughter of the Egyptian king, who's brutalizing, enslaving the Israelites, and trying to kill all the firstborns, saves our hero in this story. And she knew the child was Hebrew, which becomes clear in the next verse. Verse 6, I'm not sure if we covered it or not. But it's pretty clear that she knows that he's a Hebrew. Here's a non-Jew female hero in the Torah, the book of the national history, you might say, of the Jews. What's the point here? To a good person, to Pharaoh's daughter, biology is not destiny. A child of evil, Pharaoh, can be good, his daughter. Unfortunately, the reverse is also true, sadly enough, but DNA does not make one good or bad. Then in verse 7, his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, and his is Moses. So Moses' sister, who apparently was working for Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get you, or notices it. I think she came up upon the scene and very bravely entered the scene and suggests, shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you? Her name is Miriam, by the way, showing great courage here, watching from afar and then literally stepping into the situation. Another heroic female, if you're not keeping count. This is, yet again, the non-sexist attitude of the Torah. None of that matters. There's really only, as Prager would put it, there's really only two classes of people in the world that matter. The decent and the indecent. Everything else is pretty immaterial. So, verse 10. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him, again, Moses' mother. When she was done suckling him, she basically turned him over to Pharaoh's daughter. She named him Moses, Pharaoh's daughter did, explaining, I drew him out of the water. A couple interesting points here. One is, Pharaoh's daughter names Moses, not Miriam, his actual, or not, it's not Miriam, shoot. I don't remember, it's kind of an obscure name. Biological mother does not name him, which was typical of the day. If someone took over mothering from someone because that someone died or disappeared or whatever the circumstance, the new person becomes his mother for all intents and purposes. Called his mother. This is his mother. So it's Pharaoh's daughter that's naming him Moses. The drew him out of the water is in fact the Hebrew translation of the name or the word Moses. There is also evidence that there was an Egyptian name Moses that was used with some regularity, but we have, as far as I know, we have no idea what it meant in Egyptian. So, verse 11, sometime after that, and now we've covered a whole lot of time. We've went from 3 years of age to manhood. I'm not sure exactly how old, but I would say give or take 20 or up. Sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. Oh, that last phrase there would certainly lead us to believe that Moses knew he was Hebrew. The word kinsman, one of his brothers, which is rationally conceivable. He did spend 3 years with mom, may have picked up on something. It's also possible that someone told him during his childhood, whether it was Pharaoh's daughter, who we know right from the get-go that she knew he was Hebrew. It's pretty clear to everybody that Moses is Hebrew, including himself, which is the point here. He turned this way and that, and seeing no one about, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. This is the first clue as to Moses' character and greatness, how he deals with this Egyptian taskmaster. Some people are very critical of Moses for having done this. But what you have to realize, I mean, you could be critical of him if he kills someone who is only guilty of beating someone. That's not an eye for an eye. That's overkill, which is not good. But what we don't see here is that the verb in the Hebrew for what the Egyptian did to the slave is the same verb that is used for what Moses did to the Egyptian. Now the verb is kind of ambiguous. It can mean beat, it can mean kill, it can mean a number of things. But whatever it means, Moses did to the Egyptian the same thing that the Egyptian did to the slave. So it was an eye for an eye. It was just in that sense. And even if that wasn't true, and we would see Moses' reaction as over the top or too much, think of his situation. What else was he to do? Either he let the evil continue, basically turn around and walk away, or stop it and face a death penalty, probably. Whether he actually kills the Egyptian or just intervenes for the slave, it would be a death sort of thing anyway. And regardless of what we think, God approved of his behavior. Or at least it's clearly obvious he didn't disapprove, because ultimately he picks him because of these tests that we see him go through, and the things that show his character. God chose him ultimately for the mission of freeing the Israelites. Another interesting thing here, right at the beginning of the verse, it says he turned this way and that. So you can kind of picture him looking one way, looking the other. What was he looking for? Well, one rational thing is he could be looking for witnesses. Did he really want to kill an Egyptian in front of anyone who might be able to say, yeah, I'm an eyewitness to this, he killed him? He might be looking for someone to help, right? We don't know. These are just sort of rational things that are interesting to discuss or think about. But what we do know is that in the Hebrew, where it says he turned this way and that, and seeing no one about, the Hebrew word there that's translated as no one is actually the word ish, meaning a man. And it actually has a little bit more meaning than just any man. It could also be extended to include what in Hebrew Yiddish, or I'm not sure what, is called a mensch, a person of great integrity, honor, wisdom, that sort of thing. So that's the root word here that's being used that he may have been looking for. There's a Jewish saying that in a place where there is no man, the word ish, be a man, the word ish, I-S-H. Whoops, did I go too far? Yes. Okay, verse 13. When he went out the next day, he being Moses, he found two Hebrews fighting. So he said to the offender, why do you strike your fellow? An evil Hebrew here, not to belabor the point, but remember I told you the Torah is just as likely to show an evil Hebrew as evil anybody else, and a good anybody else as a good Hebrew. This is the second intervention by Moses against evil. And in addressing the aggressor here, Moses asks him, why do you strike your fellow? The reaction of the aggressor was, it's the difference between being decent and indecent when you're caught doing something wrong. Do you say, oops, sorry, you're right, I won't do it again, I'll be better next time? And if you actually are better next time, you're actually penitent. You have repented. Under the same circumstances, you did not commit the sin as you did the first time. That's a pretty high accolade, actually, well, particularly in the Jewish faith. Another thing is to redirect, to accuse the person who is accusing you, to do name call, all that stuff. Here it is, 3,600 years ago, and we're still doing it today. And we do it in big ways and we do it in little ways. I mean, driving along, if you're caught doing something wrong by another driver who honks his horn or whatever, do you say to yourself or to them, even if possible, oops, sorry, or do you just flip them off? And we all know there's probably more people that do the flipping off thing than just apologizing and trying to do better next time. It takes a secure person to take criticism, to be accused of doing wrong, and then admitting that you're wrong. Everyone does wrong, right? It's a matter of how you react. Okay, so now Moses is a wanted man in Egypt, basically, mainly for the killing of the Egyptian taskmaster, but presumably for this thing too. So what does Moses flees? He flees Egypt. And he goes out to a faraway land, and he comes to a well where the people of the area water their flocks. And apparently what's been going on here at this well is that men flock herders have been coming here and, in essence, bullying or crowding out a female who has brought her family's flocks. In this image, you can see her off to the right there in white. Her name is Zipporah, and so he makes a clear way so that Zipporah isn't blocked from the well. He even helps her water her flocks, I think. And in any case, Zipporah is headed back home way earlier than normal. And when she gets there way earlier than normal, her dad asks her, and this is what the verse is, verse 20. He, Zipporah's dad, said to his daughters, "Where is he then?" Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't finish the story. The dad asks her, "How did you get home so quickly?" And she says something to the effect, "This strong, handsome man protected me from the bullies. I was able to water the flocks quicker, and so I got home early." Then, in verse 20, Dad asks all of his daughters, "Where is he then? Why did you leave the man? Ask him to break bread." This is a very reasonable a question for a father to ask who has 7 daughters. Some gallant man shows up and you didn't bring him home for dinner. It's a little bit shocking that she didn't. Never fear, the story turns out well in the sense that Reuel, the father of the daughters, gives Zipporah to Moses as a wife. So Zipporah is Moses' wife, eventually. Interestingly enough, there is no mention of love or beauty from either of them about the other, or from anyone else, for that matter, about either of them. This action of Moses' at the well was his third approach to combating evil. And it's basically our choices for combating evil as well. The first one was violence. He either beat or killed that Egyptian soldier. Number 2 is to speak. He confronted the Hebrew aggressor and told him, in essence, back off, buddy. And then now 3, he stands there. The way it's described in the Torah is more like he just blocks the access. It's not like, this picture is a little not quite right, because I don't think he was hitting them, fighting them kind of thing. But it was the best picture I could find, so oh well. So anyway, violence, speaking, and just being in the way, just standing there, are the 3 basic choices for fighting evil. So in 22, Zipporah, Zipporah, bore a son whom he named Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And in fact, the Hebrew name Gershom is made up of two words, ger and foreign land, or over there. So Gershom is stranger there, is in essence how you could translate it. So finally in verse 24, or next in verse 24, we're obviously skipping verses here and there in order to get through even half of this. God heard their moaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the previous three patriarchs. Why didn't God intervene earlier? The Israelites have been enslaved for over 400 years. It's a legit thing to ask, I think, and often people ask. In fact, people ask this all the time. It's generally not 400 years, though. It could have been 200 years, right? Or it could have been 100 years, or it could have been even 1 year or 1 month. Why did you let it go on so long? Why did you let my child die of some terrible disease? Why did you let my wife be killed in a car accident or an earthquake or a hurricane? We're always asking, all of us ask in one way or another, why didn't God intervene earlier? Well, if you're approaching this rationally, you're trying to dream up reasons. One is God may well have his own timetable. For whatever reason, we are not privy to it. And that's just it. Prager's approach to this, what he thinks is that particularly as you look at all these kinds of stories where God didn't, and then did, in this case, they cried out, as was enumerated earlier, but they weren't praying. It doesn't say they prayed to God for something. They just cried out, like in pain, like you're in agony. It wasn't necessarily directed, in fact, there's no reason to believe it was directed at God. They forgot God. So Prager's thought is that God intervenes when you relate to him. And you can't expect God to intervene if you haven't attempted to contact God. There's no two-way communication thing going on there. This is not necessarily gospel, but it's an interesting way to look at it. In any case, however you look at this, the word remembered in 24 doesn't mean to imply that God forgot. What it does mean is that God decides to act. And you can, whenever you see the word remembered, particularly in the Old Testament, referring to God remembering something, it's almost always, it's not that he forgot, it's just now he's decided to act. Now Moses, this is beginning of chapter 3, now Moses, tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. The word wilderness in this verse in the Hebrew means furthest reaches, as far as you could go. And if you were Moses and you hated evil passionately, isn't that about where you'd want to be right now? You have witnessed so much evil in Egypt. Now you have a chance to, in essence, get away from it all. He didn't want to be a leader, Moses, and you probably all remember that from the story. He argued with God about, I can't do it, I can't talk well, blah blah blah. And isn't this sort of one among the first stories, but of many, showing us that leaders, great leaders, often don't have any interest in being leaders. It's the opposite of the guy who runs for president because he can taste it. And unfortunately, when you hear that phrase mention, he can taste it. He is so passionate about becoming that things like truth and solidness on policies and positions kind of goes out the window. That tend to lie, flip-flop, do whatever they think will work to get elected because they could taste it. Well, not Moses. Moses didn't want to have anything to do with it. And if you read the whole thing, Exodus 1 through 10, you'll see many times he points this out to God. I'm not your guy. Horeb, by the way, is the area around Mount Sinai, which, of course, the Ten Commandments are going to be revealed to the Israelites. So this is not a totally different place, or a separate. It is the same place. It just tends to be far away from Egypt. Whoops, sorry. Another thought that came to Prager's mind that I thought was intriguing about great leaders. Great leaders usually come from, or often come from, somewhere else. They have more perspective than just one nation. Pretty much a great number of the founding fathers of the United States came from Europe. Whether they came directly or the ideas came with them through their families. It's good to be familiar with at least two, if not more, groups of diverse people. You learn a little bit of empathy that way. Another thought he had was that it's usually good, or often good, for a leader to spend time in isolation, to spend time contemplating, you might call it meditating, to prepare for something. A number of rational explanations, so to speak. So, chapter 3, verse 2, we got to the burning bush. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. The first thing Prager mentions, being a devout Jew, is that the burning bush is a metaphor for the Jews. Constantly burned, but not consumed. And if you think about it, that's kind of true. They over and over and over get sort of burnt to the ground, but they are not gone away. They come back somehow or another. The angel here is interesting too. The angels of the Torah are not winged, human-looking creatures. They are messengers, and they can take all kinds of forms, dreams, visions, things like that. Here, what Prager thinks is the most rational thing to think of is that the angel is the fire itself, not the bush, the fire. And another thing to note here, that Moses gazes at the burning bush. He doesn't just glance at it and move on or whatever. He is paying attention. Moses said, "I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up?" This paying attention to something and asking questions like that and thinking to himself, perhaps, is this for real, or is this maybe something divine? And Prager goes on to elaborate on this by pointing out that noticing the divine in anything is a choice. And most of the time we cruise through life not really paying that much attention to everything around us. We don't look enough, we don't look closely enough, we don't look long enough, but Moses did notice. And this actually was God's last test of Moses. Would he notice the divine, Moses? He did. we have the same choices. You see a baby born, for instance. You have a choice of how to think about it. Is it divine, or is it just sperm and egg and 9 months at a time? We have a choice. Do you see God at work in other things? Do you even try to see God in other things? Did Beethoven come from paramecium by way of infinite number of monkeys and an infinite amount of time and an infinite number of typewriters? Or was it in some way divine? It's all this. Seeing the divine or not seeing the divine is pretty much a choice, each of our own individual choice. And it's not just whether you see the divine. It's your choice whether you're going to be happy or not. It's your choice whether you're going to be honest or not. It's your choice if you're going to be hardworking, if you're going to be kind, if you're going to see miracles or not see miracles. To believe in God, and why not believe in the sense of existing, but trust in Him, or at least live like you trust in Him. It's a choice to love or not. If there is no God to choose to believe in or not, then life is ultimately pointless. Humans have no more meaning than rocks, no more purpose, no more significance. Good and evil don't objectively exist. There's only material reality. There's no moralness to things. It's just opinions. Everything, even a moral code, without a God, is just opinions of insignificant humans are going to turn into dust eventually and go away into oblivion. If there's no God, love is just neurons firing. The mind is deceiving itself to think it's even thinking. To believe, on the other hand, Prager would say, is to live a much richer life, way more meaning, a hope-filled life. He would also point out that to be agnostic is kind of a middle ground. You know, maybe there's something, maybe there's not. I don't know what to call it. And Prager would point out, you can intellectually be agnostic. Have this discussion going on in your head: is there a God? Is there not a God? What kind of God, or which God is it? Blah blah blah. But behaviorally, in terms of what you do day to day, you either act as if there's a God, or you act as if there isn't a God. There is no acting like maybe there's a God named something, or maybe there's a God named this. You, generally speaking, you either act as if there's a God, as in the God of the Hebrews, or there isn't. Moses chose to look carefully, and he saw a miracle. And we can make that too. Verse 4. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he answered him, Here I am. Only after Moses pays attention, turns aside to the bush and studies it, does God speak. God communicates with us generally, maybe even only after or if we notice him. It's that choice thing. And it's kind of like Shakespeare. God will only speak to you after you study God. Like with Shakespeare, you don't know Shakespeare until you read, and the deeper you get, the more you get out of it. The more effort, the more meaning. That's what animates me about this whole Torah study thing. It's just fascinating, and I do see the divine in it. And Moses' reply here is, I want to point out, here I am. It's the same yes, sir kind of response that Abraham replied when God spoke to him. Same Hebrew word. And he said, do not come closer. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. This is God talking to Moses, obviously. No land, though, is inherently holy. It is holy because God is there. It's where we bring God into, or where we encounter God. This is another one of those choices. You bring God into something, or you see God there where you are, or not. It's a choice. Verse 12, and he said, I will be with you, that shall be your sign, that it was I who sent you. And when you have freed the people from Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Moses has been arguing with God up till now about leaving. He's got the speech impediment. He's a wanted man, all that sort of stuff. And God is telling Moses here, Moses, it's not you that matters, it's me. Moses' character is important, but it's God that will bring success. What is the sign that they're talking about here? What shall be your sign? God's speaking to Moses. The sign is the freeing of the people. Then you will know that what this was all about. And isn't that true? Prager points out, God's intervention in something is often only clear in hindsight, in retrospect. Whether it's nations, things that involve nations, or whether it's things that just involve you. It's often that you don't recognize it till after it's done. And Moses is chosen here not because he sounds good. That's why the speech impediment argument didn't go anywhere. Moses is chosen not because he sounds good, but because he is good. And God said to Moses, Eya Asher Eya. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. He continued, thus shall you say to the Israelites, Aye sent me to you. This is that infamous, I am what I am. If you all remember the Ten Commandments movie with Charlton Heston. And there's a number of ways to conjugate this verb, Aye. E-H-Y-E-H is the transliteration. It's the verb to be in Hebrew. And in Hebrew, this verb has no present tense. Am is are. That's true of a lot of languages, by the way, but and also in Hebrew. So there's many ways this could be translated. I am that I am, who I am, what I am, and half a dozen other ways. This name is never mentioned again, or this God calling himself I am what I am is never mentioned again. It's probably just for Moses. Not likely understood by others in the day. But it is for us to ponder or understand or appreciate. In the next verse, God gives Moses a much more understandable name to use, Adonai. It's where we get Jehovah. It's the same letters. It's interesting that it's the same letters, the verb that we've been talking about, the verb to be, and Jehovah Adonai. Probably the best translation for any of them is God simply is. And God said further to Moses, thus shall you speak to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This shall be my name forever. This my appellation for all eternity. In the rest of this chapter, God's telling Moses what to do, what to say, which includes going to the elders, which is what he's talking about here. And tell them, I've taken note of the outcry. God directs that the elders go with Moses to Egypt, but that doesn't actually happen. Basically, Moses and Aaron, his brother, get there alone. God tells Moses to ask for days off. This is a sort of a little insight into what's coming up. God tells Moses to ask for about a week, is what it amounts to go into the wilderness and make sacrifices. But Moses botches it when he talks to Pharaoh. He doesn't ask for a week to go into the wilderness to worship our God, we the Hebrews. He says, let my people go, period. It was also God also wanted him to use the word please. There's a Hebrew word for please that God told him to say, but he didn't say that either. It's no wonder Pharaoh reacted the way he did. He didn't come across very cool at all. Moses continues arguing with God about he's not the guy. What if they don't believe me? God tells Moses, see that rod over there, pick it up. He puts it on the ground, turns it into a snake and back into a rod. God tells him, take that rod with you. And you will see that rod. You certainly saw that rod a lot in the Ten Commandments, the movie. And it does play a role in this story. One of the things God assures Moses is that all the people back in Egypt that want to kill him or see him dead are in fact dead themselves. So he did kind of lighten his mind a little bit, you might say. And the Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the marvels that I have put within your power. I, however, will stiffen his heart so that he will not let the people go. This is an interesting issue that comes up here, which is, did Pharaoh really have free will? Or did God basically make him not let the people go? The Torah speaks of stiffening his heart, Pharaoh's heart, 20 different times during this story. Half by God and half by Pharaoh to himself. So was it fair to punish Pharaoh for what God may have or appeared to have forced upon him? Well, probably not a problem. God believed that Pharaoh deserved to be punished, so how it gets there is less important than it getting there. An interesting argument, though, that Prager makes is that by stiffening Pharaoh's heart, it gave him exactly what he needed in order to have free will. It gave him the strength to say no. Otherwise, it would sort of been like a guy with a gun to his head being asked to confess something, and a confession like that is basically worthless. You have no idea if the guy's telling the truth or not. So clearly Moses is putting a gun to Pharaoh's head. He may not have had the wherewithal to say no if his heart wasn't stiffened. Okay, moving on. 23. I have said to you, let my son go, that he may worship me, yet you refuse to let him go. Now I will slay your firstborn son. We're still talking here about God telling Moses what to say and what to do. We're not actually in Egypt yet. But this is an interesting bit of the story that doesn't get remembered much. That God is alluding to the 10th plague here, the killing of the son, at this point, early on in the story, before even Moses gets to Egypt. But Moses does not repeat these words as instructed. Why not? Well, you can ration up some things. He probably feared for his life if he told Pharaoh that his firstborn was going to be slain. He could have been fearing something else and not totally trusting God. It's in this story, this harkens back to the difference between believing and trusting. To trust in God does not mean God will intervene all the time either. It means He will ultimately do right by us, but that ultimate justice may not be in this lifetime on earth. This is one of those things that alludes to an afterlife. The Torah doesn't talk a lot about that, but it makes it pretty clear. Like you remember that going back and meeting your ancestors. How else are you going to do that if there isn't some sort of an afterlife? So you're on your own to go finish through chapter 10. It's basically going to start with Moses blowing the lines that God told him to say, blowing them when he says it to Pharaoh, getting in trouble. He yells at God because he thinks God did evil, in fact. It's the only time that one of the historical patriarch type figures actually gets aggressive, more attacks God than asks questions or struggles with, I'd like to know this or that. Moses goes after him because he thinks God did evil. And it's a story about the straw where Pharaoh says, we're not going to provide you straw anymore. You Israelites have to make as many bricks, and you have to gather your own straw now too. So that ought to set it up. Chapter 10 will take you through the 9th plague, And we will pick up again, next week, the 29th, I think that is, I hope, the Exodus and Moses Part 2, and there's the chapters to read for it, if you're reading ahead at all. We probably won't cover everything. We'll be lucky to get even half of it in because we go way too deep on a verse by verse thing. So let me get back here and open this up again, see if there's any questions.
Good. Hey, Jamie,
okay,
you've got
I think everybody's
Genesis.
back on if you want to be.
Yeah, Genesis should be Exodus 11 to 19.
Any questions from anybody?
Yes. Alice says it looks like you've written Genesis 11 to 19.
Okay, well then, thanks everybody for joining, and we will see you next week on the 29th.
Okay.